Now, when I think of the lesson for today of gratitude, there are so many historical examples of people who display gratitude, just miracles and marvelous things. But there's one individual that comes to my mind that I just want to briefly share with you about. His name was Otis Reuben Bailey. We don't name kids Otis anymore, do we? Where are the Otises today? Otis was my wife's grandfather. And I didn't get to know him until he was 81 years old. So I wasn't there the whole journey. But what I saw in my years of getting to know Grandpa Bailey impacted me deeply because he was a man of deep gratitude. He was the type of person that had every reason in the world, not the fake reasons like Frida, but every real reason to be bitter and critical and angry and judgmental. When I first got to know him, he was in the hospital having knee replacement surgery. Now, he grew up on a farm, spent a lot of time on a horse, and I don't know if you've ever seen someone who spent most of their life on a horse. They walk a little different. He was bow-legged. He'd been bow-legged his entire life. Grandma says, I could pick my husband out of a crowd, one because he was tall and because he had a certain strut to the way he walked. But as what happens when you grow old, bones and ligament go out, and Grandpa had to have knee replacement surgery. And because of the policies of the hospital and of the medical community, they would not repair his legs bow-legged. They said, we have to straighten your legs. And I'm sure there are medical reasons for that or whatever. But it forever altered how Grandpa walked, and it made him very unstable. And ironically, it was many years later, but it was a fall that led to his death. And Grandma says, I don't recognize my husband anymore because he's not walking the way he used to. They repaired his knees, and thankfully the surgery went well. When you're that age in the hospital, there's also always other things that can happen. But they repaired his knees, and it made him incredibly unstable. He had bladder cancer. They lived out on a farm in West Valley, Yakima, and one day they were robbed, lost everything. They didn't have very much of value. But Grandpa had been a carpenter for his whole life. And in the carpenter union, you get pins for years of service and for awards and recognition. And he valued those pins. They were of no value to anyone else. But that's what the thieves took. Took some of his treasured tools. As he grew older, he began to make mistakes. He burned down his garage accidentally. Burned down all those tools, all those things that were important to him. So many tragedies struck his life. He was the second oldest of 12 siblings, and he watched 9 of his siblings, including his older siblings, die before he did. And yet I have never met a more optimistic and positive and grateful man in my life. And finally, and this is just in the years I knew him, finally, to make matters worse, because of his bladder cancer and because of other issues, we all assumed Grandpa would go first. But wouldn't you know that it was Grandma who developed a heart problem and died. And although the sparkle left his eye, they'd been married, my wife figured, I think, 65 years. And every day, Grandma still sat in his lap. I mean, they just loved each other in such a beautiful way. And when Grandma died, of course, the sparkle in his eye went away. And yet there wasn't a day that we would see Grandpa and we'd say, "How are you doing, Grandpa?" And just the thought of it, he would begin to tear up and he would say, "The Lord's been so good to me. I don't deserve it. He's been so good to me." And from a worldly perspective, if you come from a perspective where God is not a part of your life, you'd say, "That's crazy. That makes no sense." He had every reason to be bitter, every reason to complain, every reason to be critical. But because of the closeness of his relationship with Jesus Christ, he was an extraordinarily grateful person. He exemplified the lessons of this week. He knew that Jesus was his friend and his life, his leader, his Savior, and his helper. There you go, getting it now. You know, in the Bible, there was a group of people who, in the reverse, had every justified reason to rejoice and be thankful in what God had done for them. And this wasn't a small group of people. As a matter of fact, this was an entire nation of people. They were the children of Israel. And God, through a series of miracles, had freed them from slavery, was leading them in the promise to the Holy Land, to the Promised Land. And previously, and the whole time during the journey, they were basically saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Any of you traveled with kids, you know? So a little travel. Are we there yet? No. Are we there yet? No. I used to think when I watched TV that was a joke. It's not. They were literally asked every 5 seconds. And that's basically what the Israelites did. Now think about what God had done for them. They were slaves. The king of Egypt had slaughtered their children. They were not allowed to worship the way God had instructed them. How would you feel if you were delivered from all of that, yet all they would do, rather than rejoice in what God had done for them, they complained? God took them through the Red Sea. He'd fed them with manna in the wilderness. When they wanted water, He brought it from the rock. Even when they complained and desired meat, He provided the meat through the quail. You would think that on that journey there would be rejoicing and song and prayer and tremendous rejoicing and fellowship. But it seems like at every turn of the page throughout the books of Exodus and especially Numbers, they're complaining. Oh, if it was only better. We would rather go to Egypt than all of this that we're having to put up with. They had forgotten that Jesus is our friend. Viva! He's our life. Viva! Jesus is our leader. Viva! Jesus is our Savior. Viva! Jesus is our helper. Viva! All they could see was and say was, why aren't we there yet? They only looked at the bad and ignored the good. And because of their rejection of God, God left them to their own devices. And in this wilderness area, there were dangers, and one of those dangers was snakes. And we talked about snakes during VBS, didn't we? And those snakes came in and began to attack the children of Israel. And suddenly, they realized having God around is actually a good idea. So God came up with a solution. He says, I'm going to help you through this mess one more time. I'm going to put a symbol of my salvation up. You're going to make a bronze snake on a pole, and when you give your attention to that snake, that symbol, if you get bitten by one of those deadly snakes, if you give your attention and you believe in my provision, you will live. You will live. That's what they had to do to be healed. They had to look and live. And one of the things we've been teaching the kids, and it's important for all of us to remember, is there is still something that we need to look to when we want to live. But it's no longer a symbol, it's the reality. It's the reality of a Savior on a cross who calls out to us saying, I want to be with you. And if you will just accept my sacrifice, look upon what I have done for you, believe that it's for your benefit, I will save you. I will heal you. Jesus invites us to look at His cross and live. We don't have to give big gestures and big offerings. We don't have to show God for a week that we'll be good like kids do before Christmas. We have to look at Him and say, Jesus, I want you in my life to be my Savior. I want you to be my friend, my life, and my Lord. Here at Central Church, Pastor Dale's been leading us through the book of Hebrews. And I find it remarkable that these lessons that the kids have been studying are so enormously illustrated in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews, among many of the books in the Bible, teaches us how Jesus is all these things, our leader, our life, our helper, our Savior, and our friend. And at the end of the book of Hebrews, toward the end, there's this verse that also talks about gratitude. Hebrews 12:28 says, therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude, by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and with awe. The journey doesn't end here. The VBS program ends here, and I think a few of us could take a deep breath. Whew. But the journey does not end here. So we hope that you continue coming with us to Central Church, that you'll join us in the journey as Pastor Dale brings us through the book of Hebrews, that we could learn more about Jesus and that we could be so grateful for what He's done for our life.